Fall damage is weird in D&D 5e. The rules for falling are beautifully simplistic, but they also lack nuance and ignore the reality of how falling works in real life, and how many feel it ought to work for heroic characters. At the end of a fall, a creature takes 1d6 bludgeoning damage for every 10 feet it fell, to a maximum of 20d6. The creature also lands prone unless it avoids taking damage from the fall. On the low height end of the spectrum, players think it's kind of silly that an experienced and dexterous rogue should take any damage, or fall prone, from a 10-foot drop. And the high height issue is obvious. Capping fall damage at 120 means that many high-leveled and appropriately built characters are in no danger of dying from a fall. Even a fall from a mile high, which is the same as a 200-foot drop in 5e's rules. That means that a level 5 barbarian with rage active can survive the worst possible falls, and a high-level monk is basically immune to fall damage with their slow fall feature. While it's true that hit points are an abstraction and players suspend disbelief all the time to play a TTRPG, both of these issues are unsatisfying to me. Taking 6 damage and falling on your ass from jumping out of a 1-story window is kind of lame when you're a mighty adventurer, and brushing off a literal skydive with less than 30 damage as a monk or barbarian is a tad immersion breaking. So I've pulled together a few semi-official and house rules that I've tried out to make falling feel better in D&D. As for official optional rules, a good first port of call is massive damage from the Dungeon Master's Guide. This kicks in when a creature takes 1 instance of damage for greater than half their maximum hit points. The creature makes a DC 15 Constitution saving throw, and if it fails, it suffers from a random result based on a D10 roll. There's a 10% chance the creature falls to 0 hit points, 20% chance they fall to 0 hit points but are stable, 20% chance they're stunned, 20% chance they can't take reactions and suffer disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks for a round, and a 30% chance they just can't take reactions for a round. Massive damage definitely adds some danger to a big fall, especially if you're falling in the middle of combat. But if you're not in combat, it doesn't really do anything to change the threat of a fall, except for the 1 in 10 chance that you start making death saves and need immediate help from a friend. Another good optional rule to consider is lingering injuries. The Dungeon Master's Guide has a table of injuries that you can roll on, but only 2 or 3 really fit the situation of falling. The first injury that makes sense is a limp, which reduces your speed by 5 feet and gives you a chance to fall prone when you dash. The other injuries that make sense are broken ribs or a different internal injury, which gives you a chance to lose an action each round if you fail a Constitution saving throw. Injuries can be healed over time or with magical healing, so they don't offer much of a problem to high-level parties. Overall, massive damage and injuries are decent optional rules from an official WotC book, but they don't do enough to change fall damage for me. They only make it more punishing and not in ways that actually feel impactful. They do nothing to stop the problem of falling on your butt from minor drops. That's where homebrew comes into play. Let's start with house rules to make falling feel less annoying for accomplished adventurers. The most common one I see DMs, including myself, do on the fly is have a player roll an acrobatics check to reduce fall damage and or negate falling prone. You can go a couple of ways with this. Like, you could say anyone with a passive acrobatics score of 15 plus doesn't start taking fall damage until 20-foot drops or higher. Or you could give an acrobatics check that scales with the distance fallen, like DC 10 for a 10-foot drop, DC 15 for a 20-foot drop, and a DC 25 for a 30-foot drop. If a character succeeds on these checks, you could rule that they take no damage and don't fall prone, or just cut the damage in half. Another common house rule involves reducing fall damage into water. Most people agree that a 10-foot jump into water shouldn't deal any damage. Kids do it all the time at publicly funded pools. An easy fix is to start fall damage into water at 30 feet and then add 1d6 for every additional 10 feet from there. There's also JC's idea to just cut the damage in half when falling into water. Simple to implement, but it makes big falls even more laughable for high hit point adventurers. As for making fall damage scarier, the most common option DMs use involves scaling damage for longer falls. There are a few variations of this house rule to increase the damage for longer falls and or remove the 20d6 damage cap. The aim of all these rules is the same: make falls from obviously lethal heights actually lethal. In real life, it takes about 12 seconds and 1500 feet of a fall for a human to reach terminal velocity. That means fall damage should actually cap out at 150 d6. Yikes. That should be lethal for anyone, with an average damage of 525. Another option is just using bigger dice, like a d10 instead of a d6 for every 10 feet of falling. Another option is to scale up to bigger dice at higher heights, like if you fall from 50 plus feet, use a d8, if you fall from 100 plus feet, use a d10, and so on. These are a little too tricky to remember for my taste. I'm happy enough with damage scaling to terminal velocity. Ultimately, you don't have to house rule fall damage to make it work in 5e. But if players complain about it, or if you yourself don't like how it works, any of these options, or your own ideas, can make falling down more satisfying in D&D. And remember, any rules tweaks you make can work both ways. So while players might learn to respect cliffsides more and protect their concentration like their lives depend on it while the fly spell is active, they'll also benefit from being able to push high hit point foes to their death. For example, if your players manage to push a Cyclops off a 1,000-foot drop, it would only lose half its hit points on average if you're using the standard rules for fall damage. With an increased damage cap tweak, your players can enjoy the satisfying splat of a dead Cyclops instead of a mildly bruised one. Anyways, fall damage isn't a huge priority as far as fixing 5e goes. I mean, it's been the same rule since AD&D in 1978, so it must be basically fine. And immersion breaking stuff happens all the time in a fantasy world, like recovering from a battle that literally brought you unconscious after an 8-hour nap. But as a DM and a player, I like the less punishing falls for acrobatically inclined characters and more damage on falls from great heights. Please write in the comments below to let me know any fall damage house rules that you've used at your tables and how it's gone. Oh, and also stories about players or monsters falling to their deaths or in comical situations. Anyway, if you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more like this in the future. It's a massive help for small YouTubers like me. This is D&D Lounge wishing you endless concentration while you're using the fly spell to get over a ravine.